Welcome to the Infill Insiders podcast, where we break down the highly complex process of infill housing development in California. We're sharing Workbench's experience to help developers and landowners know how to use the many state housing laws to develop more infill housing. Also to help jurisdictions do a more effective job with their part of the process, and to help elected officials, activists, and anyone interested to learn more about the big challenges that remain with infill housing development and how those might be addressed in the future. I'm your host, Sibley Simon, and today we're going to be talking about what are often called SB330 pre-applications, a very important specific step in the development process, but one that is typically misunderstood and misprocessed. But first, before we get into the rest of the episode, I'm going to introduce myself a little bit. So I grew up in a rural farming area in Washington State, have lived in a few different parts of the United States, but for nearly 20 years, I've been here in Santa Cruz, California. In the early 2010s, after having been a software entrepreneur in a first career, I started volunteering more and more around chronic homelessness and changing the system so that more folks got out of long-term homelessness. But that just made me so much more passionate. Even as we made progress with that, homelessness has not been coming down in California. So I became more passionate about the housing crisis and how it affects everyone, with everything from environmental impacts to worsening health outcomes to increasing poverty rates, and just we cannot have successful communities without solving it. So 11 years ago, I decided to become a housing developer and to really have a personal mission around helping our infill housing supply, helping create more affordable housing that's less publicly funded because there's not enough public funds to solve that problem, and to help address the racial equity issues around housing and housing development as well. But this podcast is not specifically about that. It's really to share what I and others have learned on this journey, because in this 11 years, after I started New Way Homes, a nonprofit fund to help fund more affordable housing, and then became a principal in Workbench, which is a development and design and build firm that focuses on infill housing. We've learned a ton because the process for development in California has radically changed in that period of time. And now it can be more successful. It can produce more of the housing we really need, but a whole new type of expertise is needed, which is how to square all these housing laws at the state level that evolve every year with all of the local zoning and processes that have existed for much longer, and how to successfully navigate that to create infill housing. So this podcast is really going to share that information and hopefully have an impact on creating more infill housing in California. I'm here with Clay Toombs, who's Senior DM at Workbench, right, which stands for Dungeon Master.
Dungeon Master, always, all the time.
So just in a couple of sentences, what do you typically work on?
So I work on getting entitlements. I mean, that's my big responsibility. So going through the process with the cities to get approval for a development permit to build housing projects.
So I'm always a little envious of the amount of time Clay gets to spend really diving into getting things right, especially as it pertains to process on entitlements. And so I'm really glad you're here to talk to us about SB330 pre-applications.
Right.
So it's not the very first thing you do on a development project, because you got to figure out the project and get ready, but it's often the first thing where you're interacting with the jurisdiction.
Correct.
And the unfortunate part of that is this is an often misunderstood and misprocessed part of the development process. Yeah. And so it kind of starts out immediately often with some rough waters with the interaction with the local jurisdiction.
Sure.
I think one reason for that is that, this is pretty new, created in 2019 with the Housing Crisis Act of 2019. That's why we call it SB330. Mm-hmm. But cities and counties have been doing pre-apps for a long, long time. Mm-hmm. But this is not that.
Right.
Can you explain a little bit what's the pre-application that cities have been doing?
Right. So normally a pre-application prior to 2019 was informal. You submitted something to the city that said, I'm thinking about doing this development, and here's the way it might look, and I want to talk to you about all of your code and requirements and what is going to be required to get this project approved. And sometimes you'd go down and sit with the city, and a lot of times they would sit down with you. They would bring in fire, police, everybody, go through your application, and at the end of that time you would get a set of comments back, and you take those comments back and maybe decide not to do your project, or maybe decide I want to change my project, or submit that project formally for an application.
And so that there was nothing binding or legally critical about that process, but it was a way to get the best understanding before you actually formally submit an application for a housing development project.
Correct. And
you can still do that. So that's its own thing.
All that thing, you can still do all of that.
If you want to do it.
You can still
But that's not what we're talking about today.
That's right.
Because that's not that's why we keep saying SB330 pre-apps. There's no legal need to say SB330. That's just the bill that created this new kind of pre-app. So we say that so we know what we're talking about.
That's right. We want to distinguish between the two things.
Okay. So you talked about why and what the other thing was that you can do and used to always be able to do.
Right.
So there's one big reason to do an SB330 pre-application.
Right.
What is that?
It's to lock in the development standards that apply for that site in that jurisdiction on that date that you submitted it. It places a flag. It sets a line in the sand that says only those regulations, local regulations that were in place on the date that you submitted the SB330 preliminary application will apply to that project all the way through until you get a certificate of occupancy after the project is fully constructed and signed off by the building department. And so that applies to anything local. It applies to all kinds of development standards, and it applies to the fees that were in force on that date as well. And so you want to do that because it didn't work that way before.
Right, so the state legislature specifically made this new thing, this new kind of pre-app to solve the problem that was very hard to develop when rules might change anytime. And then, jurisdictions who really didn't want a project might deliberately change the rules to stop a project, but that's not what most of the changes were. They just be changes that are happening in a very complicated system all the time, and how can you plan and know that if a development's going to work out if you don't know what the rules are actually going to be by the time you're building it?
That's absolutely right. Yeah.
So that gets some degree of certainty. Now, as you said, it applies to local rules, it applies to fees. It does not apply to state laws.
Correct.
Right? So the state legislature could still change something, and that changes the project. So, but a couple little questions on that. What if, a lot of it, you don't want to be caught out because of something becomes less favorable. You think, suddenly now there's another $1 million fee or something, and that makes it, and you've already spent so much time on the project. But what if local rules become more favorable in some way?
Yeah, so they wouldn't apply either, even if they're more favorable, because you've locked in those development standards. Obviously, the jurisdiction can always choose to let you do the more favorable standards. That's up to them. SB330 prohibits them from applying new development standards without your permission, but you could certainly give them permission to.
Great. That's a really important point. And we've experienced that where now something new was permissible, I think in the city of Santa Cruz, I'm not remembering, but I think we wanted the project to take advantage of that. And so we've asked, and they have allowed us to, and because they had a reason, they changed the rule, but they allowed us to take advantage of this new rule that we wanted to take advantage of. So they wouldn't necessarily have to allow us to do that. But like I said, there's probably a reason they changed the rule. So, okay.
But you could, if you submitted the SB330 preliminary application, locked in the standards, and then the local jurisdiction changed the standards, and it was only or maybe mostly beneficial to your project, then you could just submit another SB330 preliminary application to lock in the new standards.
As long as something really negative hadn't also happened or something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so that's why you do it, and that actually is, and we want to really emphasize to folks, that's extremely important. Yes. So important that we recommend always, any housing development application is submitting an SB330 pre-application. We always do it.
Every time.
Even if you just don't think things are going to change for some reason, we just do it.
In fact, you should do it even if you waited until the very day you submitted the full development permit application. You should also submit an SB330 preliminary application at the same time as your full development permit application. It's that important.
Yeah, so if somebody just didn't know about this or didn't know how important it was and somebody listening to this podcast was about to submit a housing development application, we would urge you also, it's not hard, especially if you have all the information for your full application. It's really not hard. Just fill out a form and have some information. Alongside it, submit. Now, I did once, just on that before we go on, I did once try to say, because the state law really says that any application that includes these 17 things is a pre-application. I did once try to submit to a jurisdiction a full application and say, well, among other things, it includes those 17. So it's my pre-application in addition to being a full application. It didn't exactly fly because there's a form and you do the form and then there's a separate fee for the pre. And so we kind of had to do two things at once, but it's worth doing that.
It's worth doing it, and I would agree with you that, yes, it does qualify, that the full development permit application does qualify as an SB330 preliminary application. But the great thing about the SB330 preliminary application is it's deemed complete upon submittal, whereas the full application requires a completeness determination. And so it's, again, much better to lock that.
Yeah, and so it just is probably going to go smoother if you just make the two things with some duplicated information and submit them at the same time. So so that's why you do it. Now I want to go into what it is, what's in it.
Right.
Because that's very interesting and important.
Yeah.
So first of all, there's a form.
Yes, there is a form that is a draft form or a model form that HCD, Housing and Community Development of the state of California, has on their website. And they have a version that's in PDF form, and then they have another version that's in Word form, Word document form. And any jurisdiction can go get that Word document form and make adjustments to it for their specific jurisdiction and then put that form up on their website. A lot of jurisdictions haven't done that, so you just use the one that's promulgated by HCD.
And the state law specifically says if the jurisdiction doesn't have its own form, you can use the state form.
Use that state form, right? Yeah.
I have to ask, though, it's not that important for the podcast, but I have to ask, why would any jurisdiction create its own form when the state has done it and we could all just use it? And because state law says that literally the form shall not require or request any information beyond that expressly identified in that part of state code. So they can't add anything new to the form.
Right.
Or forbidden.
Right. Well, I'll tell you, the city of Santa Cruz is a great example of this. They had a sort of a checklist that they had created. It was kind of confusing and wasn't that user-friendly. And we said, hey, why don't you use the state form, because it's clearer and it's simpler and, it has blanks that I can fill in instead of sort of a checklist. And the city did a really great thing. They created their own new form based on the state form, but they added something to the end of it where they said, hey, look, you have to answer all these questions about your site. Is it within so far of a I'm sorry, you're going to have to probably cut some of this, but there's a whole series of questions about where this thing is located.
Yeah, earthquake fault
zone, exactly, flood zone, all this stuff.
Historic stuff, whatever.
Well, just as one of example is it in a high fire severity zone?
Yeah.
No place in the city of Santa Cruz is in a high fire or very high fire severity zone. So they kind of gave you guidance that says you can always answer no to this question, right?
Yeah,
and so they kind of guided you through answering some of those questions and made it easier. Yeah, so that was good. That was one way in which jurisdiction could make the application form better.
Okay. And we're going to get to what's in it. There's literally 17 things. Also, some of those have subparts, but there's 17 parts to what state law says must be in it for it to be complete, and that it can't ask for anything else. So those are the parts.
Yes.
So, but we've also run into jurisdictions where we submit that, and they want, along with it, other things like a contract that says we'll pay them more if they spend more time on it, or holding them harmless for whatever harm may come from us submitting this pre-application, or other things. And the bottom line is you do not have to do that.
You don't have to do any of that.
And because some of this stuff is misunderstood, I think this is the whole development process is like this, but this is one where you need to know your rights. And sometimes you can be a little flexible.
Right.
Like I said, okay, it's good to actually make some sense to do two applications at once rather than trying to say it's one. But you got to know your rights because you will get wrong answers most of the time on some things. Yeah.
And I think that the jurisdictions are getting pretty good with the SB330. Some smaller jurisdictions are not quite as...
Right. If you look, though, 539 or whatever it is jurisdictions in California, I bet the majority of them have never yet received an SB330 pre-app.
There's a lot of them that haven't. Yeah.
And I mean, we've been the first in multiple jurisdictions, and we know even in the last 18 months we've still been the first that they've ever seen, right? So for good or bad reasons, you'll get misinformation. So now, what's actually in it? We're not going to go through all 17 parts, but I categorize them in a few ways.
Right.
First, there's some identifying stuff, like the parcel numbers, the address, and who the applicant is, and the owner of the parcels has to sign up. So you got to get that stuff right, because that's actually just identifies what the application is tied to. So you have that vesting for a project on that site, property, whatever. So, there's a little bit of that, and you got to get it right, but that's just formality. Then the other thing, then the next big thing that now we're going to really talk about is that there's a couple numbers that are really important.
Really important, yeah.
And those numbers are the base density of housing units that you're including in the project, and the, how would you say it?
The base square footage of construction.
Base square footage of construction. Now let's talk about those a little bit, because it's easy to just think, what's important here is the number of units and the size of the buildings. But in fact, number of units. What is this base?
Yeah, so it's excluding a density bonus. Okay, the way it doesn't actually say base in the law. It says excluding any density bonus. And so this means excluding the additional units, the bonus units that you would get under the state density bonus law. Also excluding any bonus units you would get from a local density bonus. So either type of density bonus, the extra units, and the extra square footage of construction. And so, hey, HCD, fix your form, because neither one of those numbers are on the form.
I was going to say, wait. Let's back up and say that. Let's back up and say
okay.
So these two numbers, well, first of all, let's say, we'll make that point again, but why are these two numbers so critical?
Right, so you cannot, when you go to submit your full formal application can be up to but not including 20% different, greater or less, than the base density in units or the base density in square footage.
So we'll focus on units first. So the number of base density units, and again, it's confusing to sort that out because that's not a term that's in the law, but it's the number of housing units excluding bonus units.
Correct.
And you wouldn't include any ADUs you might do in the future on the property or whatever, but just in your project, the number of units that aren't bonus units, this vesting, that is the whole reason you
lock in those standards.
You'll lose that vesting if you that vesting won't apply to a version of the project if you apply for it at some point that it varies by more than 20% or 20% or more.
20% or more. Yeah.
So if you put 100 base units in your pre-application and you eventually went for a project of 120 base units, you would not have that vesting.
You would
anymore.
not have that vesting anymore. Or 80.
Or if you went in with 80 units, you would not have that.
Above or below by 20% or greater, then you lose that vesting.
Right.
Yep.
Okay. And not just your initial application, but projects evolve, right? You might even get your entitlements and you come back to modify those entitlements. Maybe even the zoning change to allow more base units. Yeah. And now you haven't done your building permits yet. So you want to come back and adjust your entitlements to have more units, because then now that's allowed and it's going to work. Interest rates have gone up. It's the only way you're going to make the project pencil. Yep. Come back and do it. But now you exceed that 20% or you hit that 20% difference. Yep. You lose your vesting when you do it, even if it's zoning that's changed. So what would you do in that case?
Well, you just said a lot, so I mean...
Well, just say for whatever reason, you do want to later in the process change the project to be 20% or more, 25% different in its base units.
Well, you have to submit another SB330 preliminary application, which in the meantime, maybe some things happen, other rules have changed, and it could be bad. So some of those rules could change in a bad way.
So you have to decide, either stick within the 20% or go beyond the 20% and change your vesting date by submitting a new pre-application, which we would still recommend, even if you already have entitlement. Absolutely. Put in a new you may only be under the local process modifying that entitlement in a way. It feels like you're keeping the entitlement. Really, you're getting a new one, but it feels like you're just modifying it. But even at that point, we put in a new SB330 pre-application. We're actually doing that on a project.
Right.
Yeah.
And lawyers may disagree with this because this is an area that's a little bit murky in the law as to whether you really need to go back and do another SB330 if you actually have a full development permit, what you were talking about before. It has the 17 items. It qualifies for it. Do you really need to do this? We could get into that in like a level 3 of this podcast. But the bottom line is always submit an SB330. It's the most surefire way to protect yourself.
Yeah, because it doesn't matter if lawyers disagree. We want to be protected.
We don't want to have a lawsuit. We don't want to have a lawsuit about this, right?
That's right. I just really want to emphasize that folks need to really try to get that base density number right.
That's right.
Because we'll do another podcast on how to calculate density, because that's way more complicated. But we had a project where we had 2 choices of how to calculate base density and get to the same project size where we were doing 40 units.
Yep.
I mean, there had a couple choices. We chose one, and for political reasons in the process, even though it was correct, city would have to approve it, but we want to have the most allies possible. We decided to switch our application to the other way. Yeah. Same project size, same building, but different base density and different amount of bonus units, and we actually invalidated our vesting, right? So, whatever, we would still choose to do that. It was the right thing to do for that project, but it shows, you really want to get this right and focus on it. Yep. Now, everybody understands kind of number of units, what that means, number of apartments in an apartment building. Right. But square footage of construction, what is that?
Yeah, so this is a confusing one, and again, HCD fixed this. So the base density of construction, first of all, the density of construction, the square footage of construction, it's as calculated under the California Building Code. So, and that's specific in the law. As calculated in the California Building Code, what is the amount of construction that you're going to build there? And typically, in some cases, depending on the type of base density we're calculating, we may build a model of what we could build with the base density and then show a project with the full density, and then it's fairly simple. This is the amount of construction that we're going to have as a base project versus as the real project. But we typically don't do that on a project where we know what the base density is as units per acre. And so there's this question, what is the base density of construction? And there's some calculations that we could do to try to, use a ratio of the base units to the bonus units, and try to calculate that. But here's this requirement that says if you're 20% different from the square footage of construction, not including a density bonus, you kind of have to figure out what that is for your project so that you know what that number is. But what's even crazier is that there's no place on the form to enter that number. So that the HCD official form doesn't ask you what is your base units or what is your base square footage of construction. It asks you how many total units and how many bonus units, and you subtract the bonus units from the total units, and that tells you that.
So it implies clearly. It implies clearly what the base unit count is, even though that number is not actually on the form.
It's not when you fill in, but you do very simple math.
Everyone would agree what it is for the submitted pre-application.
That's right.
But on the square footage of construction, no one would agree because there's not enough numbers there to calculate it.
That's right.
So the 2 things that matter most, that you would lose your vesting if you vary from, are not things that are actually explicitly stated in the pre-application. Correct. This is so symbolic to how crazy housing development is in California. But that is the way it is. That's the system we work in.
That's the way it is.
So
I want to talk about a word or in there. Okay, so in this thing it says 20%. So you can't vary by 20% or more from the base density in units or the base density in square footage of construction. I think that the intent of the legislature was that or was sort of allowing you to do either one. So if your base density in units was more than 20% change, but your base density of construction, square footage of construction, was within 20%, your SB330 is good and vested. Or the other way around, that's what I think they intended, but the word or is problematic.
Because you can read it either way. And the reason it probably makes sense, as you described as the way it is intended, is because density is generally calculated in one way or the other. Either it's form-based density, and so your base density is a base square footage of construction,
right?
And then you have bonus.
Right.
Or you got units per acre as density, that's the base. And so whatever your base is, you can't vary your base by more than 20%. Right. That would make sense as the intent of the law, but that's not super clear. And it absolutely can be, a reasonable person could read it and say you can't vary either, right? On each project has both, and you can't vary either on that project. And so anytime there's that kind of gray area where even though we think we know what it means, reasonable people could disagree, then we got to be conservative. We can't risk our project. We got to, but we would love that to be clarified.
And there's some rules of construction in state law, and I'm not an attorney, everyone. I'm not an attorney, but there's a rule of construction about how generally in state law we're supposed to interpret that word or, and that word or, as normal construction, probably means that you have 20% on both of those things, not your choice of one of them.
Yeah. On the other hand, there's all these housing laws say they should be interpreted to allow for the maximum housing development.
Right, that's right.
And that would seem to, but in any case,
fix this HCD, fix this new application form.
New application form, it's really got to, oh my gosh. So those two things, that's a whole category of those two numbers that are not quite on the form are their own category of information in the pre-development application, and that is super important. Then there's a couple other categories of things. One you alluded to before, which is this factual information about the site. Is it on an earthquake fault zone? Right. Does it have historically listed
wetlands, coastal zone, all those things?
Species of significance, all this stuff. You just are filling that in to the best of your knowledge. And so that's one category. And the other category is a bunch of design stuff about your project, your site plan, and your materials you might use. So like, is this going to be green stucco or black and white random batten siding, for example, and other things. Like there's a bunch of that stuff that's required to be in there.
It's required to be in there. Yeah.
All of that stuff, the factual information about the site and all that design stuff, does it matter?
It doesn't matter. You can't lose your vesting because you change or were wrong, because you changed the design or you were wrong about whether you're in the coastal zone. You find out later that you were in the coast. Doesn't change your vesting. You're still vested. And again, the vesting is really the only thing this is for vesting. Now, from the jurisdiction's perspective, they want to receive something that sort of talks about your project and that they can respond to, right? They don't have to respond to. We'll talk about that in a minute. But they see this as kind of it's sort of a notification to the jurisdiction saying, hey, jurisdiction,
we're working on a project.
We're working on a project, and we want you to be aware of it. And by making you aware of it now, we lock in those development standards. But at least you know you're aware of it. And then that gives the jurisdiction the chance to reach out to you, to try to work with you, to try to maybe influence in the very early stages of your project what you're going to do with that project, to make you aware of things. And there's some other stuff that you can do along with the SB330 preliminary application. We can talk about a little bit.
If you are wrong about whether you're in a high
nice to know that.
severity fire zone, and you put it out, it'd be great if they told you, like, hey, actually we're looking at an old map. You're actually in it.
It's just as important as telling you that, hey, you calculated your base density wrong.
Right.
Yeah.
But it is really important for people to understand. You have to include all this stuff.
Yes.
You have to have something about the materials in your design of the building. But there is zero consequence to some of this information being wrong or changing some of those things. Right. And we'd encourage people to try to be right for those reasons, right? And because it causes confusion also in the public. Sometimes these are posted on the website of the jurisdiction where it causes confusion. Of, oh, you said this and now it's that. But so you try to be right, but there's not legal consequence to being wrong or changing what your building looks like or your design. And so we would usually put these in early enough that we really haven't done serious design thinking, for example, of about Are we making trash enclosure and where's it going? Or does the fire truck have quite enough room to turn around in this quick sketch of the site plan that we did?
Right.
We want to get it in so early, know that there's vesting, and move forward, that we don't worry about all those things. We just provide a decent shot at the direction we're going.
Correct.
In this.
Correct.
Great. So just want to be super clear, all those things, you could change from a 2-story building to a 5-story building, or as long as the base
density stays the same.
But you might have it might actually change a lot if you used way more bonus space.
Well, that's the whole intent of it, right? So you can imagine that you submit an application for, say, a 3-story building with maybe no density bonus at all. You just a 3-story base density building. It has no density bonus units at all. And then in the course of developing that project, the jurisdiction comes back and says, well, you slightly exceed the height, or you're too close to the setback line, or some other thing. And so then you want to provide some affordable units in order to take advantage of the density bonus program, either locally or state density bonus program. And so you say, okay, well, I'm going to add these units, and now I get a bonus, and now I can build a 4-story building here. So it's fine.
That's fine. You have your vesting.
That flexibility, I always say this, flexibility is a feature, not a bug of the state laws. You have flexibility to make these changes. It's a feature. It's not a bug.
Great.
Yeah.
One little nuance in this that does pertain to a project that I've worked on is that it does say, that these base numbers are irrespective of bonus increases. You can use bonus density, like concessions and waivers, for example, to decrease, say, the amount of commercial space you might have. And that would still be in your base area of construction under this.
Yes, that is, again, the base area of construction is problematic because the base area of construction includes both commercial and residential space.
Right.
And so
even if you're going to reduce your your commercial space using density bonus law, for example, in theory, as I read it, the full required commercial space is going to enter into that calculation that you have to be within 20% of.
And hopefully you'll still be within it because you're going to make there be more residential space to make up for the loss of commercial space. But it's, again,
there's some nuance there, and I'm just encouraging people to look at that nuance.
There is some nuance there. You need to be careful.
If it matters, Okay. So all about the whole point of it is this vesting that you get when you submit it. When is it submitted?
Oh, when you submit it and you've paid the fee.
Right. So you have to not only give it to the jurisdiction in the way they want to get it, which sometimes is uploading to a portal, sometimes it's taking it and handing it in paper.
I would say a little bit different. The way the law reads is the jurisdiction has received. They have received it. So if you deliver it on their website, if you send it through email, if you show up at their office and handed it to them over the counter, I believe that any of those things mean that they have received it. However, it also requires the payment of the fee. And the payment of the fee, a lot of times isn't, you just don't know what the fee is. Many jurisdictions don't yet have on their, universal fee schedule an item, SB330 preliminary application. They may have preliminary application because they used to have a preliminary application that required tons of time. So it's sometimes very difficult to know what the fee is. So the best thing to do is just send an email or call them and say, what is your fee for an SB330 preliminary application, so that I can provide the check at the same time. But of course, you got to run a check down there, or you've got to upload and pay money somehow. And sometimes they got to create an invoice. And so it could take a little while to pay the fee.
And I want to dig into that a little bit, because technically under state law, they were required to have the fee for this posted on their website.
That's correct.
So under state law, one could absolutely say, if they don't have a fee for this type of pre-application posted on their website, here's what it is, it's $200, then there's not a fee.
I've made that argument before, not because I want to deprive any jurisdiction of their fee, but because I don't want to wait several extra days for them to tell me what the fee is, because it's not posted. It has to be posted. In that particular case, the jurisdiction did have something on their website that said preliminary application, and so they just charged us the old preliminary application fee. which isn't completely ridiculous. I mean, they
Yeah.
do want to review it and give us some comments.
And that's where, there's a limit to which you have to know your rights and you have to push for the important ones. But sometimes you also, the flexibility, you have to flex to fit within the system because it's not worth fighting over a little fee.
No.
So technically, we've paid a lot of pre-application fees that really, if you look at them, are ridiculous.
Right.
We might be paying $1,500
Right.
for the jurisdiction, just to 2,000, just to take this in, and we say stick it in a drawer, file it however they want to file it, because they do not have to look at it. And we'll get to that next. But so to just the act of taking in the money, taking in the document, we're paying $2,000. We shouldn't have to do that because legally the fees are supposed to be proportional to the amount of work they're doing. Right. And they haven't posted a fee for this. But you know what? It's so important to get this vesting that we may make those points to urge them along nicely to do better in the future. But we just want to pay the fee and get it in.
We want to pay the fee so that it's vested.
Yeah. So hope cities improve on that. I have also been in the situation where the city takes 6 weeks to tell us what the fee is.
Correct.
What do we do?
Well, I mean, I've tried a few.
And they just won't respond with what the fee is.
They won't do anything, and so you're kind of stuck. I mean, one thing I've done in the past is I've written a check and I've said, left the amount blank, and right under the amount said not to exceed $4,000, and handed them the check and said write whatever amount you want in there, but the fee is paid. I've also tried to send them something that says, hey, jurisdiction, the applicant hereby agrees to pay any reasonable cost of reviewing this application inconsistent with state law. Therefore, the fee is paid on this date. They haven't gone for either of those things in the past, but it does kind of urge them along to hurry up and tell me what the fee is.
So it's something that I know the state legislature has looked at a little bit, and we would love to have some kind of time limit. Well, I mean, in theory, it's solved because it's supposed to be on their website, but it's not. So what we really need is teeth about that.
Well, what they should just do is they should just add to the 17 items, item number 18, a fee in the amount of $500. Done.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be fantastic.
Yep.
And go up $10 a year or whatever. Yeah. Okay. So just to clear up, also, is this pre-application an application for a housing development project?
It is not.
It is not. So there's all kind, and the reason I bring that up is because I've had multiple jurisdictions say, oh, now you've given us an application. We have all these things that happen when you give us an application. We start all these processes, and we have to get all the departments to look at it and stuff. Yep. Or they may even say state law requires us to do X, Y, Z, to get back to you in 30 days. So about completeness, because state law says every time we get an application for a housing development project, we got to get back to you in 30 days or we have 30 days to respond to you in X, Y, or Z way. But it is really important. This is often misunderstood. In the state law, this pre-application is not an application for a housing development project. So everything else the state law says about applications for housing development projects does not apply to this SB330 pre-app.
Right.
That's a know your rights kind of thing, to not have things head off in the wrong direction.
You don't need to do that. It's very specific in SB330. It says, this shall not be interpreted to mean that the jurisdiction is required to respond to this SB330 preliminary application. If you submitted it and they never did anything, you show your fee receipt. It was submitted on that date. It was complete on that date.
You're vesting.
Yeah, you're
vested then.
You're vested then.
So there is no review that the local jurisdiction has to do. There's no 30-day period after you submit.
They may. They're certainly welcome to provide a review, but they're not required to.
And what do you do? The other day, I got in the mail an inch-thick packet of paper.
Right.
That was a review and an incompleteness letter for an SB330 application. And it did acknowledge in the letter that no review was required. And I think it's saying that the incompleteness letter is not saying that our SB330 pre-application is incomplete. It's just saying, well, if this, in so many words that weren't super clear and didn't necessarily follow state law, if this was an application for a housing development project, then it would be incomplete.
Yeah. You don't have to do that, cities and counties. It's not required. You don't have to review it. It's nice when you do. We appreciate the comments that you give us and heads up about certain things. It's not
In that case, I didn't. I was sad about it, that time spent, because we deliberately had, we just had to get it in, and the project design was not even really what we're going for. And we told them that, although the square footage and the unit count is where we want it. But we're working on a lot of design changes. We just wanted to get it in, but unfortunately, then they spent their own time picking it apart anyway.
In that case, you just want to respond to them and say, look, you received, as per the SB330, whatever, whatever the code number is on that. You received this, the fee was paid on this date. Our SB330 application was complete on that date, and it has vested the development standards as of that date.
It's not a bad idea just to communicate that back.
Just communicate back. It's done.
If you have any questions, give me a call.
Right.
Kind of thing.
It has been done. Now, let's say that they really said, no, it's not. Your SB330 preliminary application is not complete. Well, the burden of proof is on the jurisdiction to prove it, okay? And so they would have to specifically point to one of the 17 items and say,
you didn't include that.
You didn't include it. I'll give you an example. One of those items is you have to provide elevations. And so, a developer submitted, if I can recall correctly, elevations of 2 or 3 or 4 sides of some of the buildings in the project, but not all the buildings in the project. And the jurisdiction says incomplete. You didn't provide elevations of every side of the building. And HCD said, no, it's elevations plural. You're good. You've done the thing.
You need to provide two elevations of some part of the project.
Some part of the project,
And you just, just legitimately make elevations of the main building or one representative. Yeah. And then you're good. Okay. So, and that brings up something applicable to a lot of these state laws, is that where there's disagreement with jurisdiction, sometimes HCD comes out with its own clarification, which doesn't necessarily have full legal force in court. A court could redecide, but it's highly influential, and generally cities want to follow that because there are other enforcement mechanisms that may come, and it's probably the direction that should be gone. Okay, let's talk about, again, it's all about the vesting. So what are other ways you could lose the vesting once you have it?
Okay, so these are the big ones. You submit it, it vests on the date that it's submitted. You then have 180 days to submit your full development permit application. Your housing development permit application has to be submitted within 180 days from the date that you submitted your preliminary application.
What if you submit at 179 days, you submit a application for a housing development project, but that submission is found to be incomplete?
I think that you're just fine. In fact, I know that you're just fine. You have submitted. It is required to have submitted that full development permit application.
And it's very common that is found to be incomplete.
Right.
There's some local
You almost tricked me up there, but absolutely 180 days. What I thought you were going to ask me is, what if you haven't paid the fee by the 188 days?
Right, that is something that happens. We're coming down to the wire. We're still working. We're going to get it in. We're happy submitting it on day 179. No problem. We can do that. The problem is exactly what you said before. Now we're at the full application, not the pre-application. And the full application, even more so, has a complicated fee. That's not just one number that we're searching for and may not be able to find.
You don't know
it's a whole calculation of some complex fees. And folks in policy don't necessarily understand that. Like, why isn't it on the website? Why don't you just pay the fee on the website? Like, oh my God. You'd have to have a PhD to calculate the fees in some jurisdictions for a planning application.
Right.
So...
and let's get straight that these fees sometimes are hundreds of thousands of dollars. Right. So it's not like just, hey,
your blank check. It's not going to work in that case.
It doesn't work that way.
So you've got to allow at least several days. And then you've got to be nervous and push for it if you're coming down to that point.
And HCD has come out with some guidance on this, but their guidance was generally, hey, jurisdictions make this easier for people to pay the fee on time. Again, legislature, fix this.
Make it certain.
Make it certain.
Okay, but you got to hit that 180-day mark for submitting, which includes paying the fee. then there are other steps in the process for getting entitlement, like the jurisdiction comes back and says we're incomplete, and then we got some time to respond to that. And if we miss that deadline,
same thing. So
we lose our vesting.
We've submitted the first full development permit application within the 180 days, and then the jurisdiction has 30 days to review that application to see if it is complete, and it's never complete on the first time. And the state law is very clear. The state law about this expects it not to be complete the first time. Typically, it's complete the third time, and that's the way the state law is written about this. It's generally complete on the third submittal of the application. We try to get it up there, do everything we can. Usually it's complete on the third time. And so the first time you submit it, they have 30 days to respond. You get this letter of incompleteness. Now you have 90 days to respond to the letter of incompleteness. And the intent here is that you just don't abandon the application or use this whole process to just delay and delay and delay. So you got to respond within 90 days. And then you respond within 90 days, and they send you a second letter of incompleteness, and you respond within 90 days, and they send you a third letter that says it's complete, and hopefully...
And we've sometimes gotten to the 90th day, because it's just a lot of work. Sometimes you do this, and we got other things, and you know. So you got to hit that 90-day, really important. Okay, then there's also one about after you get entitlement to get it construction.
Right. So you go through the whole process and you go to a planning commission, and the planning commission says your project is approved, and then maybe you get appealed and you go to the city council or the board of supervisors and they say your project is approved. That's the date your project is final approved. Or if they didn't get appealed, then the time period runs out, which is the 14 days typically in a lot of jurisdictions for somebody to appeal at it. But you've got a final approval on a date. And then you have 2.5 years for most developments, or 3.5 years if it's an affordable housing development, meaning 100% affordable housing, roughly. Then you have that length of time. 2.5 years to submit for a building permit, or 3.5 years to submit.
It's not start construction, it's submit for a building permit.
You have to submit for a building permit. And then you get your building permit, and assuming that you've submitted for your building permit, you get your building permit, you go out there, you construct the project, and that SB330 vesting happens all the way until the date you get your final certificate of occupancy. Once you've gotten your final certificate of occupancy, project is done, the SB330 vesting is over, and now those units are an existing development that are subject to all the other state laws for existing projects and local jurisdictions laws.
So I just wanted to highlight that one because often local government entitlements might be good for 3 years, or with this whole pandemic and state laws, some have been extended to have like 8 years. The entitlements are good for 8 years or whatever, but you could lose your vesting and then...
Yeah, and I want to be clear, when I say lose your vesting, you have an entitled development. You get to go and build the development. It doesn't take away the fact that you are entitled. You are entitled to build that project. What it does take away is your fee vesting primarily. Okay. So your fees are also vested. And when we say the fees are vested, we should probably talk about fee vesting, right?
Briefly, yeah.
Briefly about fee vesting. It's not that the amount of the fees is set in stone forever. It is that the fee had to have been enacted by the jurisdiction prior to the date of your SB330 preliminary application. And any fee increase that may happen between that date and the later date when you're paying that fee,
or starting construction,
whatever it is, but you're going to pay that fee at some point in the future. The thing that was enacted has to have within it a fee increase that is tied to some
time and consumer price index,
inflation, something like that. So it can increase because inflation, but it can't increase because they decide that they want more money, right? Yeah. Okay, but if you didn't get construction started, or you didn't complete construction by it's really start construction within that 2.5 to 3.5 years.
Submit for building
permit within 2.5 years, then you would lose that vesting.
Which there might be some new big fee that
could be a big fee, and now you're all of a sudden you're subject to that fee.
Yeah. Okay.
But you don't lose the project is entitled.
It's entitled. Yeah. Okay. Awesome. So I want to move us forward here. Oh, there's one more thing that we've encountered, which is what about when a jurisdiction says, oh, you've submitted a pre-app, and now our policy is once we get a pre-app, we want to do a public meeting about the project. How do you feel about that? Well, don't tell me all of how you feel.
Yeah.
What do you think about it?
I mean, I understand what the jurisdiction
Yeah.
wants. They're like, hey, you submitted this, preliminary application. We want people to have a say in your project right from the very beginning, and this is the best time to do this because, you haven't
Once you spend
decided.
$1 million designing it, you don't want to change it.
You don't want to change it then.
Yeah.
So I understand why they want you to do that. But, can they do it? Can they require that? I don't really think they can require it. Maybe they can. I mean,
they can hold a public meeting about it.
They can hold a public meeting about it. You probably want to show up if they're holding a public meeting about it.
I mean, where I come down on it, just react to this. Where I come down on it is that they can hold whatever public meeting about it, and the document itself is a public record.
Yep.
So now it's out there that you're working on a project, right?
Yep.
And if it's part of the process, they're going to do that. I think it's just better to show up and be there and engage in that. So sometimes that happens. That does that count as one of the? It doesn't count because it's not a hearing. There's a lot of projects are subject to a maximum number of hearings that can be imposed or required or held by the local jurisdiction. That's
five hearing rules.
But that's not. This is not one of them. This is a meeting, a public meeting, informational meeting. Okay.
As a matter of law. And again, I'm not a lawyer. As a matter of law, I don't think they can require you to do a community meeting, neighborhood meeting, in order to be able to submit.
In order to be able to submit
a development permit application. You have the right to submit a development permit application. Once you've submitted the full development permit application,
and
then they can require you to do that in the process.
Right. Okay, so then if you're going to have one anyway, maybe do it then or whatever. It's more impactful to do it earlier.
The problem comes really not so much that they want you to have one, it's the timing of it, because again, a lot of times it's very, very simplistic when we do it at that point. We don't necessarily want to go have a whole community meeting about a project that really might not be exactly what we've decided to build. We're still thinking about it. So, but yeah, if they want to have a community meeting, generally, go have the community meeting. You're going to get a lot of feedback. Some of it might be really, really helpful. You might learn things about that project or that area, or that neighborhood, that you can make a change very early on, and it's good to do that.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've covered the why you do it, what's in them, what often goes wrong. There's a couple options one has that we think should always take these options.
Right.
But they're not required. When you submit a SB330 preliminary application, you can ask for a fee estimate.
Yeah, it's a fee estimate. It's a non-binding fee estimate. All right. It's just a request to the jurisdiction, and they have to respond within 35 business days. So it's kind of a really weird thing here, but they basically have 7 weeks to respond to this and give you a good faith, is called a good faith estimate of your fees. There's a couple of reasons why you want that. One, you want that good faith estimate because you may not know about all the fees. And by the way, jurisdictions are not super great about posting their fees on their website all the time.
That they're required to.
Do.
But it doesn't happen.
But it's also kind of hard sometimes to interpret them and apply to your project. So this is a great way to find that out. Just what are my fees going to be on this thing, so I can plan for those fees. The second reason is the SB330 preliminary application locks in those fees. It vests those fees. So you get this one at this stage that says, these are the fees that your project's going to be subject to, and then when you actually get your building your entitlement approved, they have to give you another one, and so you're able to compare the one that you get when your project is entitled, fully approved, with the one you got your SB330 preliminary application. And if this one has all of a sudden added a whole bunch of fees that you never heard of before, then they probably or maybe have enacted those fees in the interim. Doesn't mean
you might catch something you're not subject to. It might have been they were left out of the good faith estimate,
which is fine, and that's not binding.
But it allows you to investigate a little bit and make sure things are correct.
You get to go check.
One or the other might be wrong.
You just say, oh, this is a brand new fee. We enacted it at this date. Well, okay, that doesn't apply to me.
Right. Yeah. And this is kind of a one-time opportunity, right? Like this is the only time that you get one at entitlement, like you said, but it's the only time you can ask for that.
You can ask, and
you can always ask.
Most jurisdictions would do it for you. They're not trying to hide anything from you, but at this point, they actually have to within
a certain time period. Yeah. Okay. So that's one, and we would recommend always including that. And then the other one is tribal consult.
Yeah. So there's another one too, which is if your going to apply under SB35, SB423, the streamlined ministerial approval process. Okay?
Probably SB6 too, maybe.
Yeah. So,
Anyway.
but any of those ones where you're going to have a ministerial project, right? But specifically for this thing called SMAP, what used to be called SB35, SB423, Streamlined Ministerial Approval Process. If you're going to ask for that, you actually can just sort of check a box. Of course, there's not a box on the actual form. Again, HCD, fix the form, needs the box. There's a kind of a check the box thing where you can say, hey, this is your notification that we're going to do this.
We intend.
It's a notice of intent. Notice of intent that we're going to use this streamlined ministerial application process. And that triggers the tribal review process, okay? Right. The tribal notification process. So that's one reason you might do a tribal notification process. The other reason you might want to do a tribal notification process is for this new statutory CEQA exemption. So AB 130 that passed.
Well, we're going to have a whole podcast
about that. There's this new this new statutory exemption under CEQA, and it also requires this tribal notification and review process, notification and consultation process. And so this tribal process can take up to about 154 days to get all the way through all of this if they request a consultation and if they request all of their extensions and everything takes the maximum period of time. 154 days could go by while you're going through this process.
And there are parts of your entitlement process that can't happen until this
happens, right? So we want to do this. We want to basically notify the jurisdiction with the SB330 preliminary application. Jurisdiction, please start this process.
They have to start it. They'll start it within 14 days.
14 days. They have 14 days from the date that you tell them to please start it, to start that tribal notification process, and that 14 days is included in 154 days, so it's going to take a long time to get through it.
Yeah, so because it's not one of the things you're required to do, a lot of people don't know about that, but we'd really advise folks to ask for the fee estimate and ask for the tribal notification process to start. And even if you don't know for sure your CEQA exemptions are just and as we've discussed separately, that's the way the legislature is going. It's kind of good practice. Like let's consult the tribes. Let's just do it. And if it's needed, you've done it. They were here first. So that's everything on that. I just want to summarize our very most important points is we recommend always doing an SB330 pre-app.
Maybe it's like voting early and often.
He said that. Secondly, focus on getting your base density and your base square footage of construction very close to correct. I mean, I got wiggle room. You got the 20%, but get it, well within that. Even if you're not writing your base square footage of construction on the application, know what it is, and that it all ties with. Nothing else matters. Good Metallica song, but also true of the rest of the stuff on your.
Great Metallica song,
and then if the project changes, despite your best effort to do that the way you want it, if it changes, file a new one. Whatever point, vote again. Okay. Whatever point in your process you are, file a new one if you need to. It's worth doing. And then request the fee estimates and the tribal consult when you do it. That's our cliff notes. Of all of this. And if you're really confused about something else or jurisdiction gives you a really hard time, call us. We'll try to help. Okay. Okay, so now in the podcast here, we want to do a couple things at the end here. Okay, one is we've just discussed this whole relatively new area of state law thing we're doing. And the reason that the state legislature put it in, I'm just going to ask you off the top of your head, there's no right or wrong answer. If this topic of this trying to vest so that things don't change after you're starting the submission process, like how important is that whole topic? If you were just rate it 1 to 5, 1 being not important, symbolic, 5 being like, this is one of the most important subjects that's been tackled. How important is it for getting infill housing in California developed and built?
I mean, to me, it's a 4, and I would rank it a 5. But as a symbolic and getting your project started and notifying that jurisdiction, I know my rights under state law, we're going to follow state law, it's a 5. It's at the very top. It's
partly because of the tone it sets and the process it starts.
It starts this process. It really sets things in stone. But sometimes
there's a lot of other big problems in our way.
Problems. I would hate to make it at a 5. Like you said, 1 to 5. If there's a 1 to 10, and then I could choose 11 for some things. This isn't an 11.
Right. Okay, so we'll call it a 4. I agree with that. Now, secondly, though, that's how important the topic is.
Right.
How well does state law serve to solve that issue, to address that important topic?
I mean, it does a pretty good job.
If you're grading on school grades, what would you give it?
I think it's still probably a 4. It's a pretty good job. I mean, we have
a letter grade it.
Oh, letter grade. I'm going to give it an A-. That's
right where I am. A-. We have to complain about the form, right?
Yeah, the form
and a
needs
couple
some
things.
work.
Couple things. I mean, but
if I had my way, because I'm a developer, I'm not the city or the county or anybody like that, I would replace this with just a simple notification. I would just say, you just file a written notification of an intent to, do a development on a given parcel of land in a given place.
That's going to conform to today's rules within 6 months, within 180 days.
That's right. Within 180 days, I'm going to submit this thing. I'm going to do it on this piece of property, and we're going to follow the rules that exist today as modified by state law. Then we wouldn't have all this 20% nonsense that we can't. I mean, it's not nonsense, but it's very confusing and it's not well defined. So having that,
I'm going to give it a B. You've convinced me to downgrade to a B, just because our process is full of all this work that doesn't really matter. Only in California, I just want to say, only in California are we so excited that before we submit an application for a development to do a whole entitlement process, which itself comes before and has to be successful before we can submit a building permit application, that the process is so much better because now we have a third application with a whole lot of detail that we can file in sequence ahead of those other two things. You've convinced me this is only a B, and there is an idea that could be an A.
But what I will say is it's also helpful to the jurisdiction. So from the jurisdiction's perspective, it's nice to kind of know what you're thinking, to have that opportunity to engage with you early on. And if they didn't have any information about your thing, then let's just have
a meeting. Let's just have a meeting. But anyway, okay, let's leave it at that. You can for once give it an A-. Not going to be okay. So that concludes our discussion of SB330 pre-applications. I just want to have one more little segment at the end because a lot of times we talk about how hard this stuff is and how the challenges, and that's a lot of what we're trying to inform people on is what are the sticking points, right? Okay. This is the let's be optimistic at the end. Okay. What is one idea that you would love to have be true that might happen in the future to make development in California, infill housing development, easier?
Well, probably the biggest thing, and it's been talked about for a long time, and it's been talked about in this legislative session, is to create a statewide list of required items for the full housing development permit application. So to do for the eventual full formal housing development permit application, what was done for SB330, which is to say, these are the things that are required statewide, so that each jurisdiction doesn't come up with their own. Under state law now, each jurisdiction is required to create a list of required information, a LORI, a LORI, for the types of development applications that they do in their jurisdiction. But it's left entirely up to the jurisdiction what to require on that. And a lot of times they require things that just frankly are costly for no reason at all. And so if you
vestiges of formal parts of the process or nice to haves, all kinds of things.
And we'll talk sometime about, how CEQA influences all of this. But most of the things that you have to fill out and do, these early things, have more to do with, or really intended to respond to CEQA. And now we have this great new CEQA exemption that, applies all the time for infill housing.
Most of the time.
In very rare cases, it won't apply, but it doesn't require you to say, for example, do a full traffic study. So you shouldn't have to do a full traffic study
for your application
in order to have an application if it's not
nothing it will affect.
There's nothing it will affect.
Okay.
You can't disagree.
So the idea there, you're saying, is
statewide law.
We did it in 2019, Housing Crisis Act, for pre-applications. Statewide. Statewide, whether it's a form or a local form, it's the same stuff. 17 things, they're all in there. You can read it anywhere you go in California. That's how you do a pre-app. let's do it for an actual infill housing application.
Full infill housing application.
Let's hope that happens. The Housing Crisis Act of 2026 can make that happen. Okay.
Boy, it's hard to believe that we're 7 years in and we're still just as much a housing crisis. Right?
There we go. Well, no one disagrees with that. Okay. So that's the end. We expect our next episode, a couple of our next episodes to be about that CEQA exemption, about SB79, one of the biggest bills passed this year. So come back for that. You can also, if you found this helpful at all, please, we're in the early days here, please give us a like, a 5 stars, a thumbs up, whatever it is. Subscribe to this podcast video, whatever it is, please do that. It'll really help us. And if you're burning to send us a question or comment, no hate mail, we get plenty of that. Yeah. If you're burning to send us comments or questions or requests, insiders@workbenchbuilt.com is an email address just affiliated with this podcast. Shoot us a message.
Below, right?
Someday we'll get fancier and have other platforms, ways to contact us, but send us that email. It's in the description. So thanks for listening to the Infill Insiders, and we'll see you next time on another exciting topic.
Thanks, Sibley.